Session 1. And it's a crazy one, right?
Bob Frissell, probably one of the craziest guests we could have had for number 1 with some of the stuff that he throws out there, like so nonchalantly and matter of fact.
Yeah, crazy like a fox. I feel like we got to preface this being session 1. Tom and I are not going to agree 100% with anybody, any guest we have on the podcast. It doesn't happen. So if we have someone on the podcast who might have some strange and far out ideas and we don't stop them and ridicule them for their ideas, it doesn't necessarily mean that we agree with it. It just means that we respect it and we want to hear it because that's what we're here for. So we just kind of want to get that out of the way just to clarify. But yeah, Bob is he's got some awesome ideas.
Yeah, that being said, most of what he said I vibe with. I think he hit it out of the park with his final hippie message of tying it all together. I love that, and I love that for this first episode because the conspiracy world and deep diving all the time can get freaking doom and gloom dark at times, and I really like his perspective on the matter.
Yeah, me too, and I do agree with, if not everything, I agree with the vast majority of what he was spitting too, for sure. Some good shit.
Definitely a jam-packed first episode for you.
Enjoy. All right. Well, I want to welcome the show's first guest, Mr. Bob Frissell. He is the father of Breath Alchemy. He is an expert on ancient knowledge, and he is an author. His most recent book, Catching the Ascension Wave, which is another absolute instant classic.
Pleased to hear you say that. Yeah, Catching the Ascension Wave was, let me put it this way. You know, I'm an author, and so I write books, but I would be researching and looking deeply into this stuff, because it's also my greatest pleasures. And so it doesn't seem like work when you're engaged in something that you'd be doing anyway, and you're doing just pure for the, the excitement and for the enjoyment of it, and my goodness, let me dig deeper here and find out what's next of it, and like that. So that's what writing Catching the Ascension Wave was like for me. And to say that I enjoyed every moment of it, well, you're going to be challenged. There's times when I wasn't quite sure how to put things or quite sure where to go next, but then I just translate that. That just becomes more of the excitement, more of the interest. Well, okay, how are we going to work this out? And I really like Catching the Ascension Wave, and I don't say that lightly because I just I'm my own toughest critic, let's put it that way. Yeah, but I like that book. I like it a lot.
I think a lot of people.
I'm glad you do too.
Yeah, I think everybody that reads it likes the book, Bob. How do you know when it's time to write a book? I mean, is it something that just works up over time and it builds up and you got to get like that creative outlet out, or is it something that is more like a spontaneous type thing?
Well, this one has been building over 2-3 years, and the thing is that I went to my old publisher and I said, look. There's 2 things I want to do. This was back in 2018. And the first thing I said is that I want to come out with a new anniversary edition, the 25th anniversary edition of the classic Nothing in This Book is True, but it's exactly how things are. And my publisher said, yeah, that's good. We'll do that. But I said, I also have another book. And he wasn't so hot about that one. And so, in fact, I had portions of the Ascension Wave. I didn't have the whole thing, but I knew that I was on to a good start. And I said, well, here, take a look at this and let me know what you think. And he actually turned it down. And I said, well, okay. I went back to him and I said, if you don't want to publish it, I'll find somebody who will. And yeah, it took a couple of years and I wasn't rushing it or anything. I was just using the time to do some deeper research. And here again, for me, research was absolutely a labor of love. It wasn't necessarily my first intention to be doing a deep dive into this stuff to write a book. That comes afterward. I finally get to the point to where, my goodness sakes, I've got enough material here easily for not only a new book, but a new book that I think will really resonate with the readers. And that's really how it came to be. Now, with regard to finding a new publisher, oh, this is so good. I reunited with my original publisher. Now, that may not what I just said doesn't make sense. So I need to clarify that. The original owner of my first publishing company, North Atlantic Books, is a guy named Richard, and I was with him, and we were not only good business partners, but we were also good friends for many years. And what happened is that he got bought out and a new publisher came in to North Atlantic. And so I didn't have any idea what had happened to Richard. But then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I get a call from Richard. And the essence of it is that, it gave me an opportunity to tell him, look, I've got a great new book here. And since he was with a new publisher, Inner Traditions, I said, how about we get together? And that's how it came to be. So it couldn't have worked out better.
Bob, it's Tom here. And for the listeners and myself, because I've listened to some of your videos and listened to you on other podcasts and stuff, and you've got some great deep information, very layered stuff. I was talking to Mike before that we couldn't have had a more heavy hitter for our first guest. And for people who might not be fully familiar, and like I said, also for myself, I want to know kind of how you got started with your deep dives, because as you said, you didn't intend to write, you were just looking into this because you were interested and passionate about the subject. So kind of where did it all begin for you?
That's where it all began. And if I were to pick a date, I would go back to around 1990. At that time, the absolute least and last of my intentions was to become an author and write a book. I just had that was just a mountain that was too steep, and anybody who was capable of writing a book, well, first of all, it certainly wasn't me, and I was certain of that. And I just held anybody who's an author and who actually has a book or more than one out there is just, I kept them on a pedestal and just thought that that I can't do that. Now, to further qualify that story, 2 years earlier in 1988, I am and have been a teacher of breathwork for, going back into the 1980s. It really began for me as a teacher in 1987. But in 1988, I had a client coming to me for a series of sessions, and after about her fourth or fifth session in a series of 12, she told me that not only was she an author, but that she was also keeping a detailed record of each and every one of our sessions, and she suggested that we co-author a book. And I went, gulp. Who, me? I don't have anything to say, as my original thought, but I didn't necessarily want to tell her that. I just talked to her a little bit more about it, and I asked her, well, who's your publisher? And she says, well, I don't have one. What we'd have to do is write a proposal and then go around and see if we can find somebody who would be willing to write the book. And I used that as my excuse. I said, no, I don't want to do that. I didn't tell her, but I said to myself internally, I would never do that. The only way I would ever write a book is if a publisher comes to me and asks. And of course, I felt I was safe. But indeed, that's exactly what happened in October of 1992. So now, how did that happen? Well, in 1990, I came to a point, and here again, Tom and Mike, I was always into this because it was just, my first love. I would be doing it no matter what, and that is digging deeply into the nature of things. And out of it, I came to the realization that just about everything we know or think we know is not true. It's a flat-out lie, and that there are people who are doing it intentionally, get to the higher echelons of the global elite, and what they're doing it is to keep us under control, hoard the information for themselves, keep us in ignorance, and that's a pretty good way to control a population. And I just got to a point to where, look, I want to know what's going on, and I don't care where it leads me to, and I'm just willing to pursue it no matter what. In 1990, after digging into this stuff for a few years, I came to the realization that in spite of all that I was learning, there is missing information, and I better get to work if I truly indeed want to find out and, uncover all the lies and get down to the bottom line truth of what's happening here. And so at that time, I had no idea where it would take me, but I realized I didn't need to, because I had the entrance requirement, that being the burning desire, that I'm going to follow this no matter where it goes, no matter where, without any preconceived notions, without trying to fit it into some sort of this is what I think it should look like, but just letting it go where it will. And it just became this fascinating journey that never ended. Well, that culminated in October of 1992 when I got a call from a guy named Richard who said he wanted to come to me and do some breath work. And I said, well, okay. So we scheduled a session, and I discovered that he was a publisher. He actually owned not only a publishing company, but it was the company that had published Richard Hoagland's book, The Monuments on Mars. Now, this was getting right into the area of my greatest interest. And so I just kept pumping Richard. I had plenty of opportunity because he came for the next 30 weeks. Every week he'd come and do a session for 30 weeks. So we had plenty of opportunity to get to know each other. He really was getting a lot of value out of the breath work that he was doing. So he developed a deep trust in me. And I'm going, well, this guy owns a publishing company and he knows about Richard Hoagland's work, The Monuments on Mars. So I just kept pumping him for more and more, deeper and deeper for more on that. And in the course of the events, I was sharing with him what I had been learning. And what I had been learning was the result of a workshop that I had taken in June of 1992 called The Flower of Life. And in that, there was a deep dive look at what was going on in Mars and how that has impacted us. And I started running that off versus what he was telling me about Richard Hoagland's work. And we really began to click on a deep level. Well, one day I got a phone call from him, and he asked me, you want to write a book? And my first thought was, who, me? No, I'm not the one. But then I remembered what had happened in 1988 when I said to myself, the only way I would ever write a book is if a publisher comes to me and asks me. Oh my goodness, this is exactly what's happening. So I couldn't say no. I realized that this was coming from a higher level. And so now I'm writing a book. And I got to tell you, it was the biggest mountain, the biggest hurdle I've ever climbed in my life. I didn't think I could do it. I began convinced that I couldn't do it, but I just kept going for it, using my 100% intention, and just kept going for it and going for it. And 15 months later, the first edition of Nothing in This Book is True, but it's exactly how things are, came out. I was convinced that nobody would buy the book. I mean, who am I? Nobody had ever heard of me. Maybe, friends and family members will buy it, but that's about all. And I was absolutely astonished, absolutely amazed when in just a very brief, in a couple of months, Nothing in This Book is True, but it's exactly how things are, just became an instant sensation. And I all of a sudden found myself getting on a plane going somewhere every week. And all of a sudden, a whole new career sprang out of nowhere. And that's really how it all began. Again, it was just a result of my burning desire to lift enough veils to uncover some truth with regard to the multitude of lies that I was discovering that we had been told. And it has just continued from there. So bottom line on all of that is I would be doing this anyway. It just has become a never-ending journey. Got to do something in your life, and you might as well do something that excites you and resonates with you. And that's exactly what I've been doing. And it has evolved into me becoming this most improbable of all authors.
Absolutely.
In the course of doing that, I've learned how to write books. So I've gotten a little bit better at it.
It's pretty powerful, too, how you basically said that all this was kickstarted by what was your original life calling, if you will, which is the breathwork stuff. And that's what brought you to being an author and made these connections with you with all these other people. So even though it didn't seem like it was really meant for you to become an author and get all this information going, it seemed like that was kind of predestined to happen.
It kind of seems that way looking back on it. I just hold that there are no accidents, there are no mistakes. Everything is unfolding exactly as it should, even though, whether it seems like it at the moment or not. That's exactly, in looking back on it, it couldn't have turned out any better. And then to be reunited with Richard, my original guy, so that now I've got not only a publisher, but I'm with the person I want to be with. Catching the Ascension Wave came out of that. And there is another book in the works too, so I'm not stopping here. Just keep going.
Well, I'm glad
having a ball doing it.
I'm glad that you're having a ball doing it, and I'm glad that you're not stopping it, and I'm glad that there's another book in the works, because I thought that this one, Catching the Ascension Wave, was an absolute, as I said earlier, an absolute instant classic. One of the things that you mentioned in there was Bill Cooper. I wanted to get your thoughts on Bill Cooper, how towards the end of his life, how he kind of had a 180 on some of his beliefs. I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, my thoughts on Bill Cooper, really, he was one of the prime movers in getting me going and really getting me digging deep into all of this. And that goes back to beginning in about 1989. And this was before he wrote his book, his underground classic, what's it called, the Behold a Pale Horse. Because I think it was in 1989, he just became a whistleblower. He knew at some point he had to. And in 1989, he gave a presentation at a MUFON conference, Mutual UFO Network conference, where he just told what he knew and what he had discovered. And then he issued a challenge at some point in all of this. Bill Cooper was a very hot commodity in those days, and he also produced a number of videos. I don't know if he ever produced them. I think that they were pretty much just videoed by somebody, and they became bootlegs. Well, I got a hold of just about all of them. So my how would you say, look into Bill Cooper's work really was back in the day of the late 1980s and the early 1990s. He issued a challenge where at the time there was no internet, and so you just research this stuff as best you can. Go to your local library was the challenge he issued, and see if you can prove me wrong. Don't believe a word I'm saying. See if you can find that what I'm saying is true or not. And I thought, well, that's a pretty good idea. So I set out trying to make Cooper wrong. And all I ended up doing was proving that he was exactly right in virtually everything that he said. So in his later life, I don't know. I wasn't following Bill Cooper at that point, so I can't comment on that. But I can say that my early research was very, very much involved in Bill Cooper. And since I became an instant celebrity, I became a featured speaker at many UFO conferences. And I got to tell you that Bill Cooper was not well received amongst the ufologists. They thought he was a kook for the most part. But what he had to say certainly resonated with me, because I had done the deep dive research trying to prove him wrong and could not do it. And so out of that, really, he was so much an influence on me back in the day I gave Bill Cooper his due in Catching the Ascension Wave for sure, and that's why.
Oh yeah, he's an absolute original, fearless truth seeker and whistleblower. I know that later in his life, though, he was at least open to the possibility, or he did a full 180, like Mike said, that he was thinking that aliens and UFOs was possibly disinfo fed to him because his superiors knew that he was kind of like a big mouth and was going to try and like expose all that stuff that he was viewing, and he thinks that he might have been used to push some information that even he didn't know if it was true or not. And I think he kind of flipped the script on the UFOs, and he thought that it was all man-made to try and set up like a fake false flag alien invasion one day.
There may well be some truth to that. And that leads me into, in the very first chapter of Catching the Ascension Wave, I can't recall what the chapter title was, but in it I went into some of the history of what he was calling the secret space program. So, that's always been a fascinating topic for me because there's a whole lot more going on than the tin can technology that NASA wants us to believe. This is all we've got, and we went to the moon through the Apollo program, but they never bothered to tell us how in their tin can technology, where they would have needed a minimum of 6 feet of lead shielding in order to get through the 25,000-mile thick Van Allen radiation belt, they never bothered to tell us how they were able to do that with virtually no shielding at all. So I don't even believe that the Apollo program was real. Who was the filmmaker? The guy who did 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Kubrick.
Stanley Kubrick.
Yes, wasn't it Stanley Kubrick?
Was that his name, Stanley Kubrick? Yeah, okay. Well, we'll go with that. He gave plenty of hints that, in fact, he was hired by NASA to do the whole thing in a studio. And so until somebody can show me how the Apollo was able to get, in the various Apollos, were able to get through the radiation belt, I'll stick with Kubrick's version of it. He virtually told us in some of his movies just exactly what he did, the most revealing being The Shining, the horror movie with Jack Nicholson. But it's worth watching if you want to take a look at the possibility that Kubrick was trying to tell us that, hey, look, we never went to the moon. I did the whole thing in a TV studio or in a movie studio. But with that being said, getting back to the actual secret space program, where Cooper said that back in the day that, through the secret space program, we'd been to the different planets and throughout the galaxy also. And so I sure wanted to keep looking into that one to see if it was true or not. And my research, oh boy, did I strike gold on that one. Because what I discovered is that back in, we've all heard about Roswell in July of 1947 and how the recovered craft led to, well, a guy named Corso, retired Army colonel, wrote a book called The Day After Roswell, and in it he revealed how that technology was back engineered and led to really the incredible advancements that we've made, technological speaking, since then. But in 1952, if you've looked at any of the UFO videos, virtually every single one of them is going to show footage of how in 1952 a whole fleet of UFOs circled the Capitol. But nobody seemed to understand just who that was and what their mission was. Well, I kept doing some deep dive research, and just recently, 2, 3, 4 years ago, I discovered that it really wasn't extraterrestrials at all, but it was Germans. And you might be going, Germans? Come on, in 1952, aren't those the guys who lost the war? And the answer is yeah, they did lose the ground war in Europe decisively. But what is not so commonly revealed is that there was also a space war going on, and they won that one decisively. Bill Cooper got me on that trail because he said back in about 1936, he said that in about 1936, the Germans made contact, or at least they found a crashed disk. He didn't know what. If it was a crashed disk they found, or they had made contact with an ET race. Well, it turns out they had made contact with an ET race called the Draco Reptilians. And the Dracos not only gave him a fleet of UFOs, but they gave them the understanding of how to build them and how to use them, how to fly them, and the whole business. Of course, the Dracos wanted something in return. That is a partnership with the Nazis. And the Dracos are not nice guys, by the way. So you can imagine what, in their partnership with the Nazis, what that was all about. But anyway, to cut to the quick, the flight in 1952 was Germans. They won the space war, and they were in no uncertain terms letting us know. And where were they headed, or where did they have their You might say headquarters? Well, under the ice in Antarctica. As weird as that might seem, that's where the Draco reptilians were headquartered also, and they carved out a little space for the Nazis to do their thing there also. And so they were buzzing the Capitol in 1952, and that was a direct message to the U.S. government saying, we want to contact you guys, and we would like to establish a treaty with you. Well, Eisenhower was the president at the time, and he didn't just go for it. It took 3 more years of, figuring it out and negotiating and all the rest of that to come to an agreement with the Nazis. And of course, we've all heard of Operation Paperclip, of the infiltration of the Nazi scientists into our space program, and also how they infiltrated the CIA. Well, this is how they did it. When the agreement was signed in 1959, that in combination with Operation Paperclip meant that the Nazis had now infiltrated our government. And of course, in the course of doing that, filled us in with the details of the secret space program. So I think it's fair to say that through this so-called secret space program, that we have been all over not only our solar system, but all throughout not only our galaxy, but other galaxies as well. Now, it's not just me saying it. There's plenty of whistleblowers who have come forth. Perhaps the most vocal of them was a guy named Corey Goode, who said that he was for 20 years, how would you say, a member of the secret space program. And then he came back and became a whistleblower to tell his story about it. But I feel an even more credible witness was at the time in 2015, a 93-year-old guy by the name of William Tompkins. Now, when he was 93 years of age, he wrote a book called Selected by Extraterrestrials. And in that book is some fascinating information. He talks about how he was contacted way back in his childhood by a race of benevolent ETs that we know as the Nordics, and that he had been in contact with them ever since and wrote a book about it. Well, he also, at a very early age in World War II, was in the U.S. Navy. And not just anywhere in the Navy. The guy couldn't have been much more than 20 years of age or so at the time. But at that time, he was placed in charge of a group of people who had infiltrated successfully the Nazi secret space program. And there were plenty of them. And they were holding regular meetings with William Tompkins, revealing what they had learned as a result of their infiltration with the Nazis. And my goodness, it was, what I'm telling you here and a whole lot more, I'm sure. Here's a guy who had been there and done that, and I feel that what he had to say put him at the top of the list of all the credible witnesses. Yeah, the whistleblowers from the secret space program, they came back with some pretty revealing information too. But William Tompkins, that was just the topper for me, what he had to say about it. So I really do feel that there is a 2-tiered space program. There's what NASA is telling us, and I like to call it their tin can technology, rocket ships and nonsense like that. But then there's the real stuff. There's the anti-gravity stuff. There's the UFOs. And like I say, William Tompkins says that we've been all over not our galaxy, but other galaxies as well. So I'll take it and go with that.
A lot of people that question NASA say we can't get through the radiation belt, or like the as you called it, the tin can technology definitely doesn't seem suited for vast space travel. And I know a lot of your work deals with ancient advanced humans or other races on Earth. So I kind of wanted to ask, you think that humans have traveled all over the galaxy and universe and planets? Is that more of a recent thing when they allied with some extraterrestrial forces, or was that kind of like something we had a long time ago and we got reset or lost or whatever? So what's your thoughts on the timeline of humans space travel?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And if you put the 2 books together, Nothing in This Book is True and Catching the Ascension Wave, you can begin to piece together our history, if you will, on this planet as human beings. And in Nothing in This Book is True, I went into great detail showing how, according to an ascended master by the name of Thoth, a guy who's been around the block for 52,000 years and never again will have a break in memory. So I figured that he was a pretty good source on all of that. And what Thoth says is that as human beings, we've been around for a little more than 200,000 years. But prior to that, Earth has a history that goes back who knows how long. I would say at least 500 million years, and probably a lot, well, I've since discovered it's probably a whole lot more than 500 million years, because there's a race of beings from Venus that became known as the ancient builder race. And they date back 2.6 billion years, and they came here, I'm sure, a lot earlier than 500 million years ago. But with that being said, human beings are a relatively recent phenomenon. But if you include the fact that the ancient builder race came from Venus 2.6 billion years ago, when their planet went fourth dimensional, and they eventually evolved into sixth-dimensional beings, they came here who knows when and established a colony in Antarctica, which at the time was not covered with 2+ miles of ice, but was probably a very habitable environment. And they built, which was essentially an underground city, the ruins of which are still there today. Well, talk about the ancient builder race, and I did talk about them in some detail in Ascension Wave. They've been not only all throughout our solar system, and when they go, they build obelisks and pyramids and all sorts of interesting structures, and they build them in a way that are built to last out of something called transparent aluminum, which is at least 5 times stronger than the best bulletproof glass that we have. So they went to our moon, for example, and Richard Hoagland uncovered the fact that on the surface of the moon, there's all these sort of interesting, domes and obelisks and pyramids and whatever. And where did they came from? They came from the ancient builder race. But the ancient builder race went throughout our local star cluster of 52 or 53 stars in our local system, and they established colonies and did their thing all throughout there. And also, because they were very benevolent, they kept the peace for about 2 billion years. So where does it all begin? Well, I mentioned in Nothing in This Book is True that there have been races that have come who are so far more advanced than we are. They've come and they've done their thing here, and when it was time to leave, they would leave, and when they leave, they usually don't leave much evidence of any of their having been here at all, the ancient builder race being an exception. If you go under the ice in Antarctica, you're going to see the ruins of the city that they established way back in the day. So yeah, there have been ETs here so far more advanced than we are that we can hardly begin to imagine. 6-dimensional beings, the ancient builder race, it's impossible for us to imagine just how advanced these beings are. And they are only one of many who have been here. But with regard to humanity, I really, as far as I can tell, our venture into deep space really began after 1955 when we signed the treaty with the Nazis, and it began earlier. Well, during World War II, there was this phenomena called Foo Fighters, and our pilots, the Allied pilots, we thought they were German, and most of the German pilots were oblivious to what was really going on with their space program, and they thought they were ours. But what they were was UFOs, and this was a product of the German secret space program, all of which was going on underneath the ice in Antarctica. So I really feel that our humanity's venture into deep space began sometime in the 1940s. My first awareness of it was through a person that I researched his work deeply, a guy by the name of Al Bielek. And he said that the Germans went to the moon in 1947. And when he first said that, I didn't believe him because, I didn't have the missing pieces back then. I go, this guy is, even though his research in other areas is fascinating, I didn't believe this because, the Germans lost the war. What would they be doing going to the moon in 1947? Didn't compute, but I think it's absolutely true. Al Bielek, by the way, is the guy who claims that he is a survivor of both the Philadelphia experiment in 1943 and also the Montauk Project in 1983. And so what he's had to say has stood the test of time, and including in 1947, the Germans going to the moon. So thank you very much, Al Bielek.
Yeah, Al Bielek is he's an interesting case, and I didn't realize that you had researched and studied Al Bielek as much as you did. That's interesting. I wanted to ask you, and just so we're on the same page, I 100% do not believe we went to the moon. I don't understand how anybody who really takes an honest look at the evidence, how anybody could come to any other conclusion than we didn't go. But it really blows my mind. One of the things that I've always found fascinating, and you actually mentioned it real close to the end of your book, it was the 100th man experiment. I was hoping you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, there's also the experiment of the 100th human.
Oh, the 100th human. That's what I was. Yeah, the consciousness. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's begin with the 100th monkey.
Okay.
This is an experiment that actually took place back in some islands off of the coast of Japan back in about 1952. And what the details of it were that there were, the whole thing was being witnessed by scientists. And what they did was they planted a bunch of sweet potatoes on at least one of the islands. I'm not sure if it was one or more of them. And the monkeys on the island, these sweet potatoes are pretty good. But the thing is that the sweet potatoes were all covered with sand. And over the course of some period of time, it was the youngsters, the young monkeys, who discovered that if you wash the sand off the sweet potatoes, they taste a whole lot better. And one monkey taught their other monkey friends, and it just spread around initially the group of youngsters. But eventually, the parents got hold of it too and began to discover that if you wash your sweet potatoes, it's really true. They do taste a whole lot better. Well, the interesting thing about that is that one told another, and you might say that when they went to bed one night, there were just throwing out a figure. There were 99 monkeys on the island. No, but they don't know for sure the actual number. But something interesting happened. When the 100th monkey, so to speak, discovered the benefit of washing their sweet potatoes, bingo, it was a chain reaction. All the rest of the monkeys on the island got it too. It's just like it happened suddenly. And so up to a certain point, there was just a certain number of monkeys, let's call it 99. But when that number reached critical mass, all of a sudden, it just became the conscious propriety of all the monkeys on the island. But it was even more interesting than that, because what the scientists discovered was that not only were all of the monkeys, or almost all of the monkeys on this island, washing their sweet potatoes, but also it reached the adjoining islands, where they didn't have any direct contact with the monkeys on the island who had gone through this discovery process. But all of a sudden, all of the monkeys, or virtually all of them, on the adjoining islands were doing the very same thing. And so they began to realize that there must be something that's connecting all of these monkeys together. And further research began to reveal that that's exactly what happened, that the 100th human phenomenon, that's a very interesting one too, because this happened, I believe it was in Australia, where what they did, they, meaning I guess you could call them scientists, what they did was they had a photo and it showed a bunch of hidden faces. Who knows how many hidden faces there were in there? Let's say there were 100. There was a huge number of them anyway. And they would show this to a group of people in Australia and say, well, how many faces do you see here? And they were given a very, finite amount of time to look at this and to see how many faces would they see. And virtually every single one of the people who looked at these faces initially said, well, I see 5 or 6 faces here. And then that's all all that they saw. Okay, but now where it gets interesting is that the same group of, again, we'll call them scientists, they went to England, and they showed on the BBC. It was on closed circuit, so it didn't go out anywhere except to England. They showed them all the hidden faces. And again, let's just suppose there were about 100 faces. And then they went back almost immediately to Australia and asked the same people again, okay, how many faces do you see now? And bingo. All of a sudden, they started saying, well, there's this one, that one. In other words, they saw virtually every face that was hidden in the original diagram. And so we began to realize there must be something that's connecting us all together. And the fact in the matter is, it's absolutely true. What there is a global grid. I like to call it a grid anyway. If you want to look at it geometrically, it's geometrically shaped. It follows the form of sacred geometry precisely. It's located about 60 miles or so above the surface of the Earth. And what it is a grid that not only connects all humanity together, but it's even much deeper than that, because it turns out that there is a grid for every single life form on the planet. Some sort of electromagnetically, geometrically shaped energy field. And no matter what the species might be, whether it's monkeys or birds or humans or you name it, there is a global grid connecting every single one of us together, or that species could not exist. So there, in fact, is a grid for every species of every life form on the planet, and this has become established fact. And the understanding of this is one of the real keys in this the whole premise. Really, the premise of my books is that there is a huge shift underway, not only just a shift in consciousness, but literally a shift in dimensional worlds, that we're in deep dive process of moving from the third dimension to the fourth dimension, to a much higher vibratory rate of life on our planet. And understanding the global grid is one of the real keys. That a dimensional shift from third to fourth dimension would not even be possible were there not a grid already in place to hold the consciousness of the fourth dimension, of this shorter wavelength, much higher vibratory world that we're very much in process of moving into. And that is a grid that has been well established by those in the know. And not by everybody, but just a few in the know, and it's been in place now for, well, as far as I can tell, firmly in place and alive and conscious and ready to go for the past 20 plus years. So we're good to go, and I'm sure we can take a much deeper dive into all of that. But that's kind of like the fairly quick answer to the whole thing about the 100th monkey and the 100th human and the global grid. So glad you asked. It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of us who do these deep dives and look into this type of stuff can kind of pick up on what you're saying about the connected consciousness. And I'm sure you guys could speak for this as well. You have a good idea or something, and you never tell anyone about it. You never follow up on it or something. But then a few months later, you see someone else put that idea into action or something, and it's almost like you missed your chance to grab that idea from the collective conscious. And a lot of the best inventors like Tesla and other great minds over time said that the information kind of came to them, that the idea wasn't necessarily just theirs. Or I think it's called the double slit experiment, where the observer can actually affect reality on like a particle or like a quantum small level. Like whether someone is observing it consciously or not can change like the outcome of what is being observed or not. So I think that makes perfect sense.
No question about it. Double slit experiment in quantum physics, and the observer impacting the outcome of the experiment. Yeah, that stuff is all well known. And Tesla, by the way, just said for the record that he was getting his information from off planet. Of course, nobody understood or probably believed him, but he was telling the truth. And turned out to be just about, if not the most brilliant scientist we've ever had, certainly, well, I take that back, the most brilliant scientist we've ever had. Too bad that his brilliant work was not allowed and still hasn't been allowed to see the light of day. But it's functioning well, and it's well and alive in the secret space program. Thank you very much. And I think we're going to be given access to it sooner than you think. Really, the premise of both of my books is that this great dimensional shift is something that's very much underway and something that we're going to experience in our lifetime more than likely sooner rather than later. So it might be kind of fun to take a deeper look at that. You guys want to go and jump into that with me for a bit?
Head first, let's go.
Head first. Yeah, well, all right. Let's go. In Catching the Ascension Wave, I wrote a chapter called "Contact in the Desert," and this unveiled for me what I felt was just some truly fascinating information. And what I discovered is that way back in the 1950s, the ETs had discovered that the best way to communicate with us was not through our governments. I mean, they had done that, they had tried that, only to realize that you can't really trust the people in our government. They're duplicitous, and they're duplicitous. Did I just make up a word? Well, you know what I mean.
I thought it was right. Yeah, you got me.
Was it? Yeah. Well, what
close
I mean
enough.
Is they don't tell the truth a whole lot. Not much anyway. So they discovered that maybe a better way of communicating with us with people who are a bit more spiritually evolved. And so they started making contact with various individuals, quite a few various individuals, by the way. And this is the essence of my chapter, Contact in the Desert, where the ETs, through these contacts, were telling us way back in the 1950s that we're about to go into a new zone of energy in our galaxy, and it's going to transform not only our planet, but also our sun and our entire solar system, and every aspect of our lives is going to be changed dramatically. And they were suggesting that it would really be a good idea to begin to prepare for this. And so there was a Canadian scientist back in the day, a guy by the name of W.B. Smith, I think it was his name, and he was actually hired by the Canadian government to investigate the UFO phenomenon. But he began to realize that, you have to go a lot deeper than just researching the Roswell crash and the UFOs and all of that, that if you really want to get down into it, you need to begin to make contact with the ETs themselves. And the next best thing to making direct contact would be to make contact with the contactees. Well, the best place to do it back in the 1950s was back in the desert in California, in Joshua Tree, because that was the site to an annual UFO conference that attracted upwards of 5,000 people. So it was really a big deal back in the day. And W.B. Smith went there to the Contact in the Desert, or whatever it was called, and began to communicate and established contact with some of the people who claim to be contactees. But he was a deep diver, and he was going, well, this is really interesting what these guys are telling me, but can I really trust it? And so in order to get down to whether or not they were telling him the truth or just making up stories, he devised a 100-part questionnaire, and he gave it to these people. The thing is that if they really were who they said they were, actual contactees, they would answer these questions in a certain way. And if they weren't, well, you can't make this stuff up. You can't fake it, in other words. And so he took the results of this questionnaire and he really ran with it with the people who answered it, you might say, in the proper way. And one of the people that he came in contact was an author by the name of George Hunt Williamson, who was a big ufologist back in the day, an actual contactee. And being an author, he had written a number of books on this. And one of the things that struck me most deeply about George Hunt Williamson is that even though I am not really at all a student of the Bible, I've hardly ever looked at the Bible to tell the truth, but George Hunt Williamson had, and he came up with some biblical codes that are just really amazing in my view. And they were detailing the transformational changes that we, along with the entire Earth, and in fact the entire solar system, must and will make as we transit from the third to the fourth dimension into a world that's such a vast upgrade that's such almost beyond our ability to even imagine it. And what do I mean by a vast upgrade? Well, we're being told by a source that I trust very deeply called the Law of One. This is a bunch of six-dimensional beings going back to the ancient builder race back in the day in Venus. In their document, the Law of One, they're telling us that the fourth dimension is at least 100 times more harmonious in every single way that you can possibly think of than even your very best moments here in third-dimensional Earth. So if you could just take a moment and imagine 100 times more harmonious, 100 times more loving, 100 times more inspirational, 100 times more compassionate, 100 times more joyful, just go on and on with this, than even your very best moments here on Earth. Well, we're talking about is nothing less than the birth of a new humanity. And according to George Hunt Williamson, in the biblical quotes that he pulled up, the Bible calls this the quickening of the spirit, where they say that flesh and blood cannot make it into the higher worlds, that our bodies must be transformed into light bodies in order to enter into the fourth dimension, or probably the Bible would call it the kingdom of heaven. But they go on to say in the biblical quotes that this is something that happens in the flash, in just an instant. It happens in a moment, where we're instantly, if we're ready to go into the higher worlds, our body instantly becomes transformed into a light body, and we go just right through, making it through with no problem at all. So this conformed exactly with what the ETs were saying back in the 1950s, at the same time that George Hunt Williamson was writing his books. And well, it certainly captured my imagination. Yeah.
I definitely am fascinated by what you were saying about the biblical codes and stuff, because I'm not the most well-read Bible studier, if you will, but I've definitely been doing my deep dive. And the other thing that I'm pretty well researched on and passionate about is like Celtic history and the Druids, because I have a lot of Irish ancestry, so I've consumed pretty much everything I can regarding their beliefs and like why their culture was kind of destroyed or covered up, or we get mixed information on stuff like that. And what I've kind of led it back to is that the Bible might have been a Druidic or like a Hermetic text itself that was kind of, like you alluded to, or the guy that you referenced, kind of putting allegory and like super advanced spiritual teachings in the stories. Maybe they could be taken literally, or more so they're like allegory and trying to like explain the nature of reality and tell future and past events in a way that only like an adept could understand. Something else too that I've heard in some of your work is the Hebrews coming from another planet, and a lot of stuff that I've come to realize is the Druids have a lot of connections back to Hebrews, and like they say that the Bible, when it was written in Hebrew, had like, you know, numeric codes and stuff even written into it. And I would like to hear your thoughts on anything that I said, but especially the Hebrew connection and the Bible being a, almost like a cheat code for this ascension that we're talking about.
Well, here's the thing that I found out. A question you have to ask is what is the deal with ascension? Is it real? I mean, are we really on the verge of, as the secret space program calls it, they're confirming the whole thing of the ETs back in the 1950s, and what they're saying in the secret space program, because they've flown their craft out there and they've witnessed the whole thing and experienced it, is that there's what they like to call a galactic superwave of very high vibratory energy that's coming in here. And they're saying again, just what the ETs were saying back in the 1950s. It's going to impact everyone and everything, and we better get ready for it, because it's going to change life completely as we know it. So what's the deal? Is ascension real? Are we really on the verge of going from third to fourth dimension? And who's going to make it into the higher worlds? Well, in my research, I discovered that there's references to ascension from at least 35 different civilizations. You can say it's in their religious myths or prophecies or whatever you want to call it, but what Jesus was saying is consistent with that of at least 34 other cultures. We've got in the Old Testament, what George Hunt Williams was talking about, but it's also in the Quran. It's also in the Native American spiritual tradition. The Celtics and the Druids have it. The Hindu scriptures are very similar. They call it the Samvarta fire at the end of an age. They also call it the Yuga fire, meaning that it comes from the sun and it causes rainbow colors in the sky. They're talking about the actual ascension. So, yeah, there's very real stuff here. And the galactic super wave, I think, is to be taken seriously. I'll just dig into that a little bit deeper. As I suggested, they've flown their craft out there, and the first thing they discovered is that the positive crew members became more positive. The less positive ones became more negative. So the question is, well, what does that mean? And the point is that what it is a very high vibratory energy that's coming in this so-called galactic super wave, and it's the energy of the fourth dimension. The unconditional energy of love, of joyfulness, of inner peace, of creativity, of compassion, of inspiration, and the good stuff like that. And what that means is that it's merging with our third dimensional, far more dense consciousness, the collective darkness that's beginning to rise to the surface. It's necessary. It has to rise to the surface in preparation for this ascension. It has to rise to the surface because only when it comes out of the shadows of the darkness can it see the light of day and therefore be transmuted into the light of day. So so what it means is that our collective consciousness here on third dimensional planet Earth is going through what I like to call the dark night of the soul. And I'm certainly not the only person who's ever called it the dark night of the soul. I'm one of many, probably. But what it means is that we're in a period of transition, that there is this collective dark night of the soul, and it's impacting everybody on the planet, and it's creating some rather intense moments for everybody, So we're quickly approaching this shift of the ages, if you will, and this means that we're already experiencing the strong urges of the light that's coming in, and it's causing the vibratory rate of the planet to dramatically increase. And so this is creating the displacement process. So in the course of this displacement process, the denser vibratory rates, denser stuff like anxiety and depression and fear and resentment and anger, frustration, guilt, shame, hopelessness, all of that denser stuff is coming to the surface. It has to in order to be transmuted into the light. And so what it means is that it's providing everybody on the planet with an unprecedented opportunity to move through that dense stuff and into the higher vibratory rate of joyfulness and inner peace and creativity and the good stuff. But then the question is, well, how do you do that? Not everybody knows how. It's really the same as saying that the changes that we have to go through, if you will, our pathway into the higher worlds is not always going to be easy. But in these end times, it is a necessary thing that has to happen. We're being given, on the plus side of this, the opportunity to resolve lifetimes worth of karma right here and right now, so that we can become ascension ready. And by the way, the bar is not held that high. I'll get into that as we dig deeper into this. The understanding that I'm getting to is that we just have to learn how to raise our vibratory rate. And in all of my books, I just talk about in great detail the necessity of emotional resolution, and it's something that we really need to learn to dive into. And in order to integrate ourselves into the higher worlds, one way I like to talk about it is that we need to make a distinction between releasing and integrating. To me, the term release implies that you're trying to get rid of something bad. It's perhaps an unwanted emotion, the negativity, the fears that we're all saddled with, the negative moods that just seem to come over. And if you try and release this, what you're stuck in, what you're going to find is that you're stuck in what I like to call a universal principle. A universal principle called whatever you resist will persist. Whatever you resist, whatever you fight and try and push away and get rid of, and whatever you, in other words, hold on to an adversary relationship with, is only going to give you more of what you don't like and more of what you don't want. So we need to come to the realization that what you fight and what you resist is never going to work. There is, on the other hand, a distinction that I like to make, and that is the distinction between release and integration. When integration takes over, it implies a shift in your relationship to what you've been stuck with. It implies a shift in from making war with it to making peace with it. And as you learn to go with what you're trying to get rid of rather than fight it, you begin to discover that you have an innate ability to align with what I like to call the harmonizing principle. And what the harmonizing principle says basically that if you can allow yourself to fully feel the very sensations that you've been fighting and resisting, what's going to happen is the energy is going to transmute. It's going to integrate into your sense of well-being, and because you've successfully transmuted this into life-enhancing energy. And so the point that I want to make is that we live life conceptually. Let me put it this way. We live on a planet that for a long time now has become totally identified with its mind. It's not who we are, it's our false self, it's our false reality, but if you identify with it totally as we have, it becomes, even though it's not true, it becomes your experienced reality. But to just take a deeper look into the nature of the mind is polarized, meaning that it sees good and evil consciousness. It looks out at the reality and it does not connect the dots. It does not see wholeness. It sees what's good and it sees what's bad. And it just becomes fixated on this. And so because it's polarized, it's in a continual state of judgment. And so you and I looking out at the reality when we're stuck in our mind, we see someone or something that if it does not conform to the idealized version that our mind tells us, this person should be a certain way, this situation should be a certain way, if either doesn't conform to it, we judge it, we make it wrong. Well, every time you and I do something like that, like judge somebody or something, and because it doesn't conform to the idealized version that our mind is telling us how it should be, there's something going on here that very much has had the tendency to keep us stuck. First of all, there's the judgmental thought. This person really is bad, really is wrong, or the situation really is bad and wrong, and I'm going to try and change it. Well, the more you try and change it, the more you get stuck in resistance. So what it does is it also creates an instantly, and I do mean instantly created pattern of energy or a sensation in the body, or very simply just call it a feeling. So there's the twofold aspect of judgment, which are really two aspects of the same thing. There's this thing is really bad and wrong, or this person is really bad and wrong, and there's the instantly generated feeling. Now, because the conceptual aspect, the thought behind it, is an inherently negative thought, bad and wrong, the instantly generating sensation or feeling can only be an unpleasant feeling. Now, you stop and think of the number of times that you've judged a person or an event, just a few times, right? And so what that means is that every time you judge somebody, you get an instantly generated pattern of energy or feeling in your body that can only be an unpleasant feeling. And because you and I, in the absence of any consciously generated integrative technique, only know how to just try and push it away. Try and pretend it doesn't exist. Try and just stuff it down into our body. Well, what happens is that the body becomes a reservoir of all this unresolved, stuck energy that does not feel good. And if you and I don't learn how to consciously integrate this energy into our sense of well-being, it's going to start running its number on us, and it's going to do so in very unpleasant ways. And so it just becomes we get stuck. We get stuck in fear. We get stuck in resentment. We get stuck in frustration. We get stuck in anger. We get stuck in all those, less than pleasant emotions, and we don't know how the heck to get out of them. Well, in order to get out of them, you have to learn to align with the harmonizing principle. And the way I like to put that is this: is if you and I walk into a restaurant, let's just suppose that we go into a restaurant and we sit down and we're waited on and we're given the menu. Now, we know that by opening the menu, that what we're opening is the various possibilities, the various conceptual representations that are available to us in that restaurant in the form of the meal. We know that the menu is just giving us a conceptual representation, that the real thing is the actual meal itself. And so we look at the menu and we decide what we want to order. And the waiter, waitress brings us the meal. And so we get to engage in the meal. In the restaurant, in other words, we never confuse the menu for the meal. Yet in real life, we do it all the time, where we confuse the conceptual representation of the thing, the judgment, the thought itself, for the actual thing. Well, it's not the actual thing. It's only a conceptual representation of it. It doesn't exist in real time. It just becomes a endless loop, a narrative that our mind continues to feed us over and over, and we get stuck in anxiety and frustration and fear, in resentment and guilt and shame and all that stuff. The actual thing lives in the body in the form of that stuck energy that we are so committed to wanting to distance ourselves from feeling us because it doesn't feel good. And so what the harmonizing principle says is that the real thing is the feeling itself, and that if you want to get on with your life, you have to learn how to discover your innate ability to transmute that energy into life-enhancing energy. And the way to do that fundamentally involves shifting your relationship to the feeling itself. You have to find a more useful way of relating to it than making it wrong, because making it wrong is fundamental to it continuing to feel bad. Making it wrong is fundamental to you continuing to push it away because it doesn't feel good. But if you can find a more useful way of relating to it than making it wrong, you can begin to discover your innate ability to transmute that energy into life-enhancing energy. Because in order to transmute it, or in order to integrate it, you have to allow yourself to have a thorough experience of exactly what it feels like moment by moment. The very energy that you've been resisting because you've been making it wrong. Well, if you can find a way to expand to include it, to give it the space to be, to allow it to be exactly the way it is, you will begin to discover your innate ability to do that. And so I go into great detail in both of my books just exactly on how to do that, and exactly how and why my breath alchemy technique is the practical application of the harmonizing principle. And so for me, that's probably just about the most important thing that I can say, because what it does is it gives you, it helps you to transmute this energy so that you can align with these times, so that you can begin to align with the higher dimensional energy of unconditional love and joyfulness and inner peace and creativity and all the rest of that. And so that you can begin to get on with what the game of life is really about. And if you want, I'll get into what the game of life is really about.
Yeah, why don't you? Yeah, we're winding down here towards the end, but I can't think of a better way to close it out than to tell us what life is all about, right, Tom?
Yeah, I like to have a little fun with that. Yeah, I'm going to tell you what the game of life is all really about. Well, yeah, sure you are. Well, yeah, but I have a lot of help from my friends, and that's from the Law of One and from all that I've learned and come to experience directly in my life. And that is that there's really two ways, and this is the Law of One spells it out perfectly. They say that you can be of service to self, meaning, your primary concern in life is what's in it for me, and I don't care how many people I step on and violate their free will and try and manipulate and control them. You can do that. But if you do, there's going to be a huge, huge karmic price to pay. You're going to be going through many thousands of lifetimes before you've integrated and healed enough of your karmic debt in order to become ascension ready. So it's not recommended. The alternative is to become, enlightened enough, if you will, to recognize that it's just all one. And in that oneness, there's really only one game to play, and that's to be of service to the greater good. And if you begin to come to service to the greater good, now you're beginning to realize what life is all about. That you get a payback that's beyond your greatest imagination. What it means, and according to the law of one, that the bar is not that high in order to move from the third to the fourth dimension. That if you're able to be of service to the greater good at least 51% of the time, that means that 49% of the time you can just be conniving and backstabbing and be a less than highest version of yourself. And as long as you're 51% committed, at least 51% committed to service to the greater good, you're going to make it through into the higher worlds. And that's why I spend so much time in both these books just spelling out just exactly what it takes in order to make that shift. Fundamentally, what it involves is just learning to transmute energy. And when you learn to transmute energy, you discover that you're not your mind. You discover that what you are, when I say that we're all one, that you in fact have a direct pipeline to the source of all. And that's through the heartfelt connection that I like to call your higher self, which is your and mine direct connection to source. And you cannot make that connection when you're still mind-based and controlled by your mind, because your mind does not know the present moment. And your heartfelt connection to source through your higher self is only available to you in the present moment. So how do you make the shift? Well, talking about the mind not being in present moment, the mind only sees the present through the unresolved eyes of the past, meaning through our unresolved emotional trauma that goes back to childhood and really even earlier than that, previous lifetimes. And as long as we continue to be at the effect of that, we're going to continue to live my life through the reactive mind, which doesn't know the present moment. It sees the present moment through the eyes of the past, the unresolved trauma, or it sees it through the anxiety of some terrible event that might happen in the future and keeps us stuck there. So there's no present time, no connecting of the dots to see wholeness through the reactive mind. We have to learn to make the shift to the present moment, which is only available to us when we discover the heartfelt connection that we all have, and that's our heartfelt connection to higher self. And that is a function of learning how to transmute energy that we all have contained within us. So I can't work with everybody one-on-one. And so I did my best to just explain exactly what's needed and wanted in order to make the shift from service to self to service to the greater good, which is service through your heartfelt connection to source, your higher self. And that's really in so many ways what my books are all about. Yeah, I talk about the secret space program and flying through the galaxies and Bill Cooper and all that stuff. But what it really adds up to is that we're very much in process. And I go into the details of the dimensional shift and the shift that we must make in order to go with that, in order to transform into a light body so that we can begin to live in a world that's much more harmonious, 100 times more harmonious than even our best moments here on third dimensional Earth. So that's kind of like the way I'd like to wrap this up. Well, it's very much the way I'd like to wrap this up.
Absolutely. As always, it was educational. I love just getting a chance to listen to you go. I always come out of it way more knowledgeable than I did going in. So I want to thank you for being the first guest to this podcast, which hopefully we have many, many more with you in the future. But where can everybody find you?
Well, first I want to say thanks so much for having me. I'm willing to be on your show anytime you want. You tell me when, and I'll say, okay, let's do it. So I enjoy being on your podcast that much. So a very deep, heartfelt thank you for just having me and coming back and having me again. Now, where can people find me? Well, I would suggest the best way to find find me is just go to Amazon and get a hold of my books. The 25th anniversary edition of Nothing in This Book is True, but It's Exactly How Things Are, which is really a brand new book because it has 10 completely new chapters and major updates and major additions in most of the other chapters. So if you think you've read Nothing in This Book is True, if you read the original version of it, oh, you're in for a great surprise. 25th anniversary edition, that's where it's at. But then don't forget Catching the Ascension Wave. Those are the two books that I really suggest if you want to find out what I'm all about, go there first. And then if you want to take a deeper dive into me, you can go to my website, bobfrissell.com. You can go to YouTube and you'll see that I'm on not only your podcast, but a bunch of other ones too. And you can check me out that way. And after you've done your homework, if you really want to check me out, you'll discover on my website that I'm willing to talk to you free of charge for 30 minutes, a 30-minute free consultation. But the prerequisite for having done that, guys, is please having read at least one of these two books, so that we're at least somewhat on the same page and can really make some hay, so to speak, in the 30-minute talk. And I love talking to people. I get to talk and work with people all over the planet. And many, if not most of the people who talk to me for 30 minutes ending up wanting to work with me. I can't work with everybody one-on-one, but the people that I do work with, it's just perfect. And I got clients all over the planet, Australia and New Zealand. I got a client in Beijing, China. I got clients all throughout Europe, all throughout North America, Canada, U.S., Mexico, and I just love it. It's fascinating, and and it's teaching people how to make this shift from the mind to the heart. And how, in the course of doing that, how to discover and to master their innate ability to transmute the energy of fear and stuckness and the energy of anxiety and depression and frustration, to transmute that life-detracting energy into life-enhancing energy, so that they can really get on with it and be the master of their own ship and discover, as Helen Keller said, that life is either an exciting adventure or it's nothing. My favorite quote of all time. That's a great parting quote. Thanks, guys, for having me. I really enjoyed the time.
Thank you so much.
Life is either an exciting adventure or it's nothing.
Yeah.
I say let's choose exciting adventure.
A lot to unpack there.
So much. Where to even begin, right? I mean, from his Breath Alchemy work to his latest book, The Ascension Wave, to some of his past work like Nothing in This Book, to the Ancient Builder Race. I mean, he's really got knowledge on everything. And you mentioned how he's got an uncanny ability to kind of tie it all together at the end.
I like that the reptilians were brought up, because the first time and how I ever connected with you, Mike, too, if you remember, was an episode on your old podcast, Reality Roundhouse, about the reptilians.
Was it?
Yeah, that was one of my original obsessed topics that I went down. And yeah, it's just a funny way of it coming full circle here.
Yeah, the Draco reptilians living in a secret base under Antarctica. I mean, seriously.
Nazis, reptilians, ancient builder race, peace and love, episode 1, session 1, sorry.
And Helen Keller. I'm absolutely certain we'll have Bob on again in the future. He's a good dude, fun to talk to. I always learn something when I talk to him. Yeah, it was your first time kind of getting to personally or chat with him. So what is your big takeaway?
Love the message that he brings with the integrating all of it and trying to serve the greater good. I definitely like that message. It's like he said, as long as you're 51% good, then you're doing it right.
51%, yeah. That's as long as you're 51% of the time. That means that gives you a lot of fucking leeway to be bad.
49% to be a piece of shit, as long as you're 51% a good guy.
If you do like the show, you can support us. Follow us on social media. We are Two Truth Seekers on Instagram and Twitter or X. You can listen to the show on any single streaming platform, Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, whatever your preference is, we should be there for you. We are on Patreon. We don't have any tiers or anything set up, but if you do just want to support the show, you can do that as well.
Definitely down the line. Hope to provide you guys with some good bonus content too.
Yeah, that's all in the works. That's definitely still to come. Hope everybody has a great Christmas.
Will you join us?